Hey everyone, Wazoo Web Bytes here, and this is going to be another cool project that we're going to be putting together today. We're going to be tackling your very first WordPress plugin. Yeah, I think it's going to be really cool and exciting. It'll give you a little bit more of an insight into working with WordPress, and it'll maybe inspire you to create some plugins of your own and seeing how easy it is to get started in creating them. All right, before we get started on putting down any actual code, let's take a look at what we'll be building today. So I've got a local Docker container up and running with WordPress. And you can see that I have a sample homepage, a sample site. If we go on a regular page, it's just the default sample page that comes with the test build. But when we click on a post, then we are going to be seeing our plugin output right here. So before the content of the post, we'll have a little block and some text in here. I've got a Bible verse here, but you can replace this, of course, with anything you want, any of your own sales language, or maybe links or announcements of new products that you've got up and running, things like that. And if you go into the plugin area on WordPress in the admin panel, you can see here that I've called it the Bible verse banner. We have a little description here. Displays a random Bible verse as a banner on each WordPress post. And where we have the ability to provide a link to a plugin site, as well as our name and a version ID. Down on the settings area, we'll have a entry here for Bible verse banner, which we'll be able to click. And here is where we can enter different Bible verses. So we can add and edit the ones we have here and hit save. And we'll get a message back saying settings saved successfully. And so okay. And why don't we add a new Bible verse here? Let's go ahead and add Exodus 25. Verse 8, and I'll just cut and paste it right in here. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Now we are parsing by just the carriage return at the end of each line. So if your text goes over one line here, that's okay, as long as you don't have a carriage return in between values there. And then we hit save verses, and things are saved successfully. And then if we go back and refresh, we'll see one of our other verses there. And then eventually we should see the Exodus 1. There we go. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. All right. This is going to be a pretty cool and exciting project if you've never tackled using WordPress plugins before. And I hope it will be informative. Let's get started. Okay, so as you can see, I've got Docker Desktop up and running here. Let's put that in the foreground. Docker Desktop up and running. It's empty at the moment. There's no containers, images, or volumes, but we'll be filling that shortly. And in the command prompt here, I'm just going to create a new folder on my desktop and call it Bible Verse Plugin. Actually, I'll just call it WP Bible Verse Plugin. Okay, and then let's get into that folder and let's open up Visual Studio Code. So the first thing we need to do is we are going to be creating some Docker files to get WordPress up and running locally. We have done this in several other projects before, so I will speed through this section and leave you to either click on some of my other videos going through them line by line. I will be highlighting a few things that I wanted to point out in the Docker setup that we'll be creating today. Okay, so we've got a basic Docker Compose setup, and again, we've gone through this in several other of my WordPress videos, but just a quick recap, we've got a services section laid out with a database and a WordPress setup. Now, the difference between this one and some of the other videos I've done is that we are going to be referencing a Docker file that we will be creating shortly, which will be very small, very minimal. And this volume here is going to be important to link the local version of our plugin code with what we're going to be setting up in the Docker container. So let's go ahead and do this now. So what we're first going to need to do is we're going to be creating a volume link between a /WordPress folder /plugins /Bible verse banner. So let's go ahead and create that now locally. Okay, we're going to create a new folder, call it WordPress. And then underneath this, a new folder called plugins. Basically, we're going to mirror the plugin structure that WordPress will set up. And then under the plugins folder, we're going to create a new folder there called Bible verse banner. Okay, and then the next thing we'll need to do is to create a PHP source file using the same name as the folder name. So within Bible verse banner folder, we'll need to create a new file called bibleversebanner.php. So now what we need to do, every plugin has a section at the top that is commented out, which provides a description and details about the plugin you are putting together yourself. So we can start that right here. I've got the opening PHP tag, and you can see I've given a plugin name of Bible Verse Banner, a plugin URI of this, example.com, a fake site, of course. A description, okay, displays a random Bible verse as a banner on each WordPress post. We've got a version number, 1.0, an author, Wazoo Web Bytes, an author URI. We could change this to my website, but we'll just leave this as example.com, and a license of MIT. And then we'll close off this PHP file here. And we will, the top of every plugin source file usually has some guards against you being able to access it directly from the URL, like the user being able to access it directly from the URL. So we can do that with some easy code here. If not defined, abs path, then we exit. And this is usually at the top of most WordPress plugin files. And this is all we need to get started, believe it or not. So this is all we need to have. And then I'll show you what this is like. Okay, and then back within the WordPress folder, let's create a new file, Docker file. It's going to be very small. How small? Just one line. From WordPress latest. So we're just going to be taking the latest WordPress image in our Docker container. And we want to do things this way because that will allow us to make changes continuously to this source file. It'll be updated automatically on our local site that is within that local Docker container. So we don't need to keep stopping the container, rebuilding the image, and then restarting Docker again. So this allows for a very quick local WordPress development. That's all we need to get started. So we can just type in our familiar Docker compose up. And Docker will do its thing. Okay, so it looks like everything is up and running locally. Let's go ahead and pull it up in the browser. It'll be on port 8080. So HTTP localhost 8080, and it will fill in the rest. It'll automatically default to this install PHP script as we've covered in other WordPress videos. So hit English states, and let's give our site title. I just call it test site. User name, I keep it as admin, and then I cut and paste the password just into an easy access notepad file somewhere. And then for an email, I usually use locally something like admin@home.com. And then click install WordPress. And there we go. That's really it. So we get our familiar login screen. We can log in and we are presented with our local site. Very cool. Let's spread this out a bit so that we see. Okay. And then let's go to our plugin section. And here we see our plugin showing up already. So by default, it is unactivated. But here's all the information that we had in our source file. Okay, right here at the top. Very, very cool. Okay. So let's go ahead and activate this. And it now says plugin activated. Okay. Nothing showing up on the settings menu because, of course, we haven't written that code yet. So let's go ahead and start writing some things now. The first thing we're going to do is add this plugin entry as an option to that settings admin menu. We're going to create a new function called BVB, short for Bible Verse Banner, underscore add underscore admin underscore menu. And you will find that most WordPress documentation, their convention for plugins is to usually begin the functions within your plugin with a shortened version of your plugin name. All the functions that we will put together here today will start with BVB underscore. And so what we want to do is call a function called add options page. Okay, and our title will be Bible verse banner settings. So page title, and then we want Bible verse banner. The second parameter is our menu title. And the third parameter is manage underscore options, which is the access level needed to make use of these admin settings. The next parameter is a Bible-verse-banner, which is our menu slug. And then the callback function that we will be needing to use. And so this is something that we're going to be creating here shortly. And so we'll call this BVB underscore settings underscore page underscore content. Okay, and then we'll terminate that with a semicolon. And then so far, nothing is calling this. So we need to register this function for WordPress to make use of it. And so we'll be using a function called add action. And then we need to pass in an action name. And so we'll be needing to use admin underscore menu, and then the name of this function we just created. So BVB underscore add underscore admin underscore menu. We'll talk about hooks shortly, but this is the very first use of a hook right here. So we're making use of the admin menu action hook to then register our BVB add admin menu function here. So now we need to actually have a page to render when someone selects that on the settings page. So let's go ahead and create that now. This BVB settings page content callback. Okay, so we've set up the function here. And the first thing we're going to do is just make sure that the user has the right security access to access our settings page. So to do that, we use a function called current underscore user underscore can, and then we just pass in a string of the type of access we're checking for. And so if the current user doesn't have the manage underscore options capability level or permission level, then we bail out of this plugin. When we want to save the content that we're going to be entering into that settings page, big text area there, we'll make use of some built-in WordPress functionality. So we'll have a function here called isSet, And we're looking for the BVB underscore save underscore versus post. And then we're going to be checking a admin refer. And this is basically to make sure that from a security standpoint, that WordPress is getting the proper communication flow from form posts. This isn't some bot that's trying to spam your plugin settings page in order to fill it with garbage. So we're looking for these particular fields in that post. And then what we're doing is we're creating a versus input. And then, so if the BVB underscore Bible versus form field is set in that post, then what we're going to do is call some WordPress functions to just basically massage that data that we're getting. And we'll be going through more of that shortly. And then once that's finished, we call update option and the BVB Bible versus parameter here, and then the versus input that we received from the post content body. And then we just display a message that the settings saved successfully. Okay, so now we're going to set up the actual form that we see on that settings page. So we store the BVB underscore Bible underscore versus string into the saved versus variable. And we're using the get option. We updated the option, which is basically a setter. We set the BVB underscore Bible versus key with the versus input value. And now we're just using the reverse of this. So we're using get option to retrieve the value from the BVB underscore Bible underscore versus key. And by default, it's expecting a string if there's no current data in this key value pair. So we've got our page set up here. We've got a div wrapper, a banner text just saying that this is the settings page. We've got our form here with a post method. And then we enter our security details here, which is what we're looking for above in the check admin refer function. And then we have our table setting up where we then provide a input area for our user to input different Bible verses. So you'll see the text area here along with just a description label. And then we're using the submit button function, which takes in the button name, which is save verses, a button class, a CSS class, which is primary, and then what we'll be tagging it under for retrieval in the post area, which is BVB underscore save underscore verses. Okay, so that was quite a bit of code. Now let's go back to our page, and if we refresh, we should see the Bible verse banner menu option. So if we click this, it will then bring us to this page that we just finished creating. So our enter Bible verses label, and then our text area where we can enter our text, and then the description that we have underneath the text area, followed by the familiar looking button that we put together. So I'm just going to cut and paste in the two verses that we're using. And again, you just separate the text with a carriage return enter key, which will be used when our PHP code parses this. Okay, so we hit save, and then settings saved successfully, which means that we have updated the BVB underscore Bible underscore verses option with the verses input text. So let's double check this right now. by going into the database itself. So in the local Docker Compose images, I've also got PHP my admin. So if we go to port localhost 8081, and if you enter your login information from the .env file, we'll have a WordPress _DB database here. And if we click on WP _options, this is then all of the options that are saved by anything using that table. So a lot of the admin panel things, a lot of the settings, they're all making use of this one table. And so if we go to the end, so on my system, it's page 6. And so if we keep scrolling down the rows, we see an entry here now for BVB _Bible verses. And if we hit edit, we then see our text that we've entered into the form. So this is all as one string in this key in the database, which we then parse as we shown in the code. So now what we can do is we can enter another function. So let's get into the actual meat of our plugin, which is displaying that random Bible verse on a WordPress post. So what we're going to do here is create a function called BVB _display _banner _on _posts. And then as a parameter, we'll be getting the content of the post itself, and it will be referenced with the variable and argument here, $content. And what we want to do is return that same content, which we'll be modifying, back to the caller and basically back to WordPress itself for displaying on the WordPress site. So first what we want to do is we can actually keep this empty. We'll be updating it, but let's register it into the hook system using add filter. So we're going to be using add _filter. And then the first argument will be the _content. And then the function name that we just created. So BVB _display _banner _on _posts. Okay, so just the same as using add action, add filter registers into the hook system. Then WordPress will be using this function as a callback, passing in the content into this function that we can work with. So let's save this and go back to our WordPress site here. And if we just open up the site into a new page, we see our regular website here. If we go into a post, so we see that everything looks okay. Everything looks as it normally does. And notice how we have nothing showing up here yet, but our plugin should be properly registered into the hook system, and it is indeed being called, and we are just returning content. We want to make sure that we're only working with posts. We're only on a WordPress post page. So to do that, there's a function called is_single. So if is_single and is main_query, then let's create the string that we want to display as that banner text. So we'll create a new variable called $versus string equals get _option BVB Bible verses. Remember, this is the long string of our BVB _Bible verses data that we saved. And then we want to convert this string into an array. So verses _array equals array filter. And then we're going to array _map trim. And then we're going to explode /n from versus string. Okay, so all this is doing is it's taking the data that is stored in the verses string, which is our entire verses coming in together as one string, separated by those carriage returns. And then we're going to use the array filter and array map to parse that verses string into the verses array. Okay, and then what we're going to do is if that verses array is not empty, okay, then what we want to do is take a random verse. So random verse equals verses array, and then a function called array underscore rand. And then from verses array. So we're going to take a random item from that verses array. And then let's put in some basic styling for that banner text. So we create a new variable called banner, and we're just creating the HTML, which is just a div with a background color, a border, padding, and some margin definitions, text alignment, our font size, our font colors, all the CSS basically embedded right in here. And then we are going to be using the function called escape underscore HTML. So sanitize the HTML that we have of that random verse. And then we're going to surround that with the p paragraph element tags, and then close off this div string. So everything is now contained in this banner variable. We have two options here, which will be really cool to play with. So we have our content coming through. Remember, our content is the actual WordPress post content. And then we've got this banner text. So if we return $banner, concatenate the $content. Okay, so if we save that, so if we return the banner and then we concatenate the content to the end of that banner, then when we refresh our page, we should be seeing our text come before the WordPress post content. So similarly, if we go back to our plugin code, and then we return the content first, concatenate the banner content to the content, and refresh the page, then we will have our Bible verse coming after the WordPress post. So I'm going to leave it the first way, where we had content concatenated to banner, and leave it to you to put together whatever kind of plugin functionality you want. This is just showing you how that's done. And that's really all we needed to tackle for this first plugin. Everything is showing up, everything works. So I wanted to go back and talk about these hooks, action hooks and filter hooks. So these WordPress hooks is a core fundamental concept for building and extending WordPress functionality without needing to touch any of the WordPress core files, which is awesome. That's how it should be structured. So we can leave the WordPress core team themselves to just manage and work on their own code base, whereas our plugin scripts are just things that we need to maintain and just hook into the existing core WordPress execution stuff. So there are two kinds of hooks, which I've kind of alluded to throughout this video, which is an action hook using the function add action. And so actions allow you to do something at a specific point in WordPress. So this is similar to the idea of events that WordPress fires. Okay, so basically how they work is that when WordPress reaches a certain point in its code, so an example is loading a page, saving a post, or maybe displaying the footer area, it's firing an action. Your code can then hook into that action and then execute your own custom callback that you've put into your plugin. So maybe a way to think about it, an analogy, if you will, is something like a train. So imagine that WordPress is a train. And so you've got a set trained track, which is the WordPress core files. And then you've got different stops along the way, which are also part of the WordPress core. But these stops are the hooks. So you can get off at a train station and do something like, say, deliver a package or pick up your mail or visit your cousin, and the train will continue on its way without being interrupted by your action that you've done at the stop. So filter hooks, on the other hand, let's go down here to where we're using it. So we're using it here to work with the actual post content. So a filter hook allows you to modify the data that WordPress is processing before it's used or displayed. So like I say, the post content that we're working with. So how they work is that WordPress passes data through this filter. Our plugin code can then hook into the filter, receive that data, modify it, and then return the modified data back to WordPress. So an analogy that we can use to think of filter hooks is something like a funnel. So data comes in, our code can change it, and then the modified data comes out the other end of that funnel. So hooks are what make WordPress so flexible and extensible. So they allow developers to customize just about any aspect of the site without directly needing to alter the WordPress core files. So another thing we can do here is, right now we've got a function here called is_single, which I described that it was a way of testing whether the current content is a post or what's called a page. So what we can do is actually change this to is_page, save it, and then go back to our test site. If we refresh, then it will no longer, our Bible verse banner will no longer appear on our post. But if we go on our sample page, it will then show up here. So we can distinguish between posts and pages within our plugin code. So just to leave things as we've set up, I'll return it to is_single. I really hope this provided you with a entry-level feel of creating your own WordPress plugin that actually does something, and you can go through it line by line and gives you a better idea as to what's happening and how WordPress is allowing our code to hook into the WordPress core system. If you liked what we went through, please give this video a like. Leave a comment down below if there's a simple plugin idea that you wanted to put together that you were able to do with the help of this video, or if you just wanted to give some feedback. I really welcome everything. Thanks a lot and have a great day. Peace.